Welcome to CIHT Podcasts.
So welcome to this CIHT podcast, The Science of Our Cities. We have more and more data today, but we're also faced with an uncertain world. In light of all of this, how do we create a transport system that is healthy? How do we move to cleaner energy sources? How do we integrate our thinking at a city level to ensure that we support people to have healthier and more enjoyable and fulfilling lives? Today, I'm joined by Laurence Oakes-Ash, the co-founder and CEO of City Science, an organization that's looking to answer just some of those questions. Welcome, Laurence.
Hi, how are you doing?
Good, thanks. Good. So can we start with the uncertainty that we face? In light of uncertainty, how do you model future decisions when faced with such uncertainty?
I think there's a range of different answers to that question. So there's the data-based answer, but I'll start really with the kind of policy answer. And I think that we intuitively have a way of answering those questions, or at least having some guesses as to what we think might happen. I think the key thing is to challenge yourself to think about, to play devil's advocate and say, what if I'm wrong? So I think with COVID as it stands today, there's two schools of thought, I think, which are kind of quite contrary. One is that it's an unprecedented opportunity and that everyone's going to seize that opportunity and that we're going to walk and cycle more and that our cities are going to be healthier. And I guess the alternative view is that everything's just going to go back to normal and possibly be even worse when schools start going back and people are concerned about how their children get to school. People are going to be forced to think about how they get to work, and it's going to be very difficult to take public transport. Obviously yesterday we had the news about wearing face masks, but we know that capacity is going to be down. So I think that, and also you've got the seasonal elements of it. We've obviously had a big boost to walking and cycling because we've had one of the sunniest periods, I think, in history. What does that look like as we move into the winter months? So I think that there's a range of different views out there. What we need to do, I think, is think about things strategically, really, because I think there's the immediate things that we need to do, and that's to help promote social distancing and make sure that people can remain healthy by whilst being in cities. Then you've kind of got the medium term. How do you plan for the medium term, which is when people start going back to school and when we do start to get more activity? What are the measures that are being put in place to really help promote the right behaviours, or move people away from private vehicles? And then you've kind of got the longer term strategies. What are the things that we need to be doing now to think about where we're going to be in 1 year, 2 years time? I think there's been a lot of focus on kind of the short term elements of that. So the announcements from the DfT around emergency measures. But I think, when it comes to kind of that longer term thinking, we don't know quite how people are going to behave. We don't know what the long-term impacts are in terms of working from home, in terms of behaviour change, and in terms of public transport, which are all things that we need to be considering if we're going to have a long-term system that promotes health.
And within that, we do have a world awash with data. We have sensors, we have real-time information, we have modeling, predictive modeling. So this enables us to, I guess, make more informed decisions about how our transport networks operate. So there is an optimization within that. How does City Science apply some of those data analytics to support decision making?
I think the key thing that we need to be better at as society is bringing in some of the kind of the ways in which the healthcare system looks at efficacy in the way that we think about efficacy in transport. So yes, we have mode choice models, and we have models for how people move through cities, but we also know that there's lots of examples where they don't work like that. And I think that one of the key things where we need to be capturing more data is around, we thought this was going to happen, what really happened, and then how do we feed back into the models that we're developing? Because I think the danger is that there's a lot of models out there that don't accurately reflect reality.
I like your use of the word efficacy, the ability to produce a desired or intended result. And I guess if that endpoint is say more people cycling, how do we then, and there's a clear ambition, not just in this country, but in other countries around the world, to encourage and support more cycling, how do we make sure that we don't actually make the wrong decisions then where we put cycling infrastructure? What data can be used to underpin a decision that therefore results in a good end result?
I mean, in an ideal world, it would be amazing, I think, to be able to see the uptake, both, because I think uptake isn't necessarily a single point in time either. There's an evolution of use of a particular piece of infrastructure. So let's assume we put in a kilometre of cycle path. That cycle path might take a while for that cycle path to be used. At the same time that you're doing that, that cycle path might also have some associated behavioural messaging, that's being promoted to the residents, or it might not. So those messages might also play a role. The demographics around that cycle path might play a role, and then some other factors such as where that cycle path goes. So how much demand's between those 2 points, how much it integrates with a wider cycling network, and then also the quality of that path. So there's tons of data in there that could underpin that question of efficacy. And we may be very lucky if we're capturing only a portion of that. So I think we really don't have a huge understanding of what intervention in which location, in which context, is going to have the maximum effect. So I think there's best practice, and I think that's based on the evidence, the best evidence we do have. But from a data perspective, I'd love to have more.
I'm interested in air pollution. Have you done work on air pollution, or your thoughts on that? Because part of the insights that I heard on the Dieselgate scandal, they arose out of data. They arose out of the mismatch between what was modelled and found in the real world versus what the laboratory sort of the expectations that were given from the automotive sector. And there's this mismatch that Professor Frank Kelly found in London, and that was through the data from APNR, the automatic number plate recognition system, and looking at the mismatch between the vehicles and the air pollution monitoring and so on. So it's interesting how some of these things can illuminate problems.
Yeah, I think there's always different biases in data that need to be understood. Not only are there biases, there's also uncertainty, and I think that the issues around air quality, certainly around different sources of those claims. We've got similar claims in terms of CO2 emissions. We may have those similar issues where the emissions factor of a particular vehicle may not perform as stated. We don't quite know how that performs. All we get in terms of the data is kind of the aggregate statistics about how much carbon is being emitted by transport as an aggregate group. So I think it is very difficult to test these things in situ, as it were.
And big data is all around us, but our roads are still congested, our cities are crowded, and that we do still face a big challenge of air pollution. So how can we make meaningful change using insights from data to address those problems?
Yeah, I guess there's obviously historic insights which are useful, and a lot of the data we have is historic. But I mean, I think we're very interested in the future, and data that you haven't got yet. And really, that's where modelling comes in. And I think it's about being able to theoretically say, if we had a system or a network that was designed like this, could we get more people from A to B more effectively? I think that's one of the great things you can do with modelling and simulation is you can start to design new systems. Now, whether or not those things can then be enacted into policies is a different matter. So I guess I'm very interested in how we do that with public transport, because I think public transport is absolutely essential for delivering the longer distance trips. And making it more user-centric, making it more focused on kind of the needs of different demographics, I think is one of the critical ways in which we're going to drive up patronage on those sorts of services. But it also requires a huge amount of information about operational efficiency, which, I think the way that the public transport system is structured, it's very much fixed timetables. 80% of the bus routes in London are the same as they were in the 1920s, so we don't change the way we think about these things. And you also have this inherent trade-off between ridership and coverage, which isn't explicit in any of the ways that we think about public transport policy. So I'm really interested in data around that, but actually it's about predicting what might happen if things were different.
And it can be things like optimizing how people interact in environments. So the optimization of traffic signals, it seems like a small thing, but can be quite a significant thing if you get it right.
So, I think optimization is absolutely a fundamental thing that we should all be embracing and kind of asking, how can we use this? Because there are some amazing tools out there. I think with vehicle routing, it's obviously something which is used a lot in the logistics sector in order to make sure that deliveries are as efficient as possible. But at the same time, all the algorithms to do this are always improving in terms of both accuracy, speed, robustness. So I think vehicle routing, absolutely, and signal timing. So we did a project with the University of Exeter where we looked at collaborative signals across the entirety of a city, and doing that, we essentially looked at 6 different networks and found that we could improve the waiting times reduce the waiting times by about 30 to 50%. So I think there's tons of efficiency that can be unlocked if you're using the right types of algorithms.
And obviously that has an impact on air pollution and so on at localized points if you get that right. And also frustration, I guess, and so on from users.
Well, I mean, one of the things you can do is you can also create what's called a multi-objective optimization. So you can kind of give the optimizer multiple objectives. So we did look at ways in which you could get air quality benefits and reduce travel times, and it wasn't as clear cut as the pure optimization, the single threaded optimization. So we were only getting about 1% benefits to air quality if we were trying to include that as well. So traditionally people looked at green waves, but essentially what you were able to do is you were able to be more explicit about what the trade-offs are. But you won't always be able to find solutions which give you everything that you want.
And I'm interested in the kind of merging of different disciplines that we'll see now. I think there's the energy sector and the transport sector are becoming much more closely interwoven, particularly when you look at the move to electrification of transport networks. But there is issues of storage and there's issues of energy systems more generally. What are your thoughts on how prepared we are for the shift to the electrification of the transport network?
I think the answer is we're not very prepared. I think that once we electrify, electrical infrastructure becomes a transport planner's problem. And I think that we don't have the tools to say, if you do this, or if you reach this scale, then this is the cost on the electrical side of that. So, when you think about, if we have electrical vehicle charging stations everywhere and everyone's charging their vehicle, then there will need to be significant reinforcement to the grid. So I think that that's something that we absolutely need to be thinking about in terms of future-proofing schemes. We could be building a new road which links sites that don't have the electrical infrastructure to support it. So, I definitely think there needs to be much more joined upness, but I think both are complicated problems.
And then in addition, we've got the concept of smart cities and Internet of Things and so on. So about connected citizens and connected communities and so on. How smart do you think our cities are currently? And then also in terms of the place where we want to be, how smart do you think they could get?
I think that the idea that you have to have sensors to be smart is probably the wrong message. And I think that smart cities are, they've got a bit of a bad reputation because it's just an opportunity for suppliers to sell things. And I don't think that's what people want. I think that putting a kind of a user's hat on, I want to be able to see very quickly what the impacts of different scenarios are going to be. I want to be able to see that, I grew up playing Simcity, and we know that Simcity is not right, but I want to be able to close a road, and I want to be able to add a new development, and I want to be able to implement a new policy and see as easily as if I was playing a video game what the outcomes are going to look like. And I think that policymakers would benefit hugely from those tools. Smart parking isn't the same thing as that. So when I think about what the future of modelling and data and policy making needs to look like, it's just having some tools that help you make decisions, just having that interactiveness, but also knowing that it's robust.
It makes it a sort of, I like the Simcity analogy because it makes it playful in a way as well, that you can see how different lives emerge out of the things that you put in. And
absolutely. You need to be able to see, not just at an aggregate level what the benefits are. You need to be able to see the broad range of, because I think everything we do in cities, it is a trade-off to an extent. There will be some who lose and some who win, and for each policy you don't just need to know what the aggregate benefits are, you also need to identify whether there are losers and whether there are winners, and understand the spread of those things, so that having tools that help you do that, I think, is absolutely essential.
And I know your background was in finance, so I guess this feels like some of that applications there, a bit about portfolios. I guess portfolios are different solutions, and also making the right investments. I guess that's one question, is about how cities compete globally. What do you think will be the measures of success for cities in a global economy? And then what do mayors and city leaders need to be asking to get there?
I think the key question people need to ask is, what do I want my city to be like? And I don't necessarily think that we can answer that for them. I think it may be that the prime objective of that city is to have an internationally competitive economy. It may be that that city wants to have a locally flourishing economy, and you get different outcomes. You get different solutions depending on what outcomes that city wants. I think the key thing that we had in finance that was just very different, I guess, is just having all of the tools available. All of the data was there. All of the analysis you kind of wanted to do was very easy to do with the tools that were provided. But yeah, I guess the key features of success for me is, is it a place that I want to live? And I think cities that are kind of asking that are the ones that will ultimately benefit, because they'll have healthier citizens, they'll attract more citizens. And if it is a good place to live, then you would expect it to be a place which is flourishing.
And a final question, I guess we started talking about COVID-19, and obviously it's creating unprecedented change. And one of the major changes that you alluded to was the number of people working from home. In the UK in 2019, it was just 5%. But today, due to the unprecedented response to COVID-19 crisis, that figure stands at 50%. And there's speculation over the future of cities that people might actually end up no longer needing to live and work in cities. They could work remotely, so they could live remotely. Do you see an end to cities in light of COVID-19?
I don't think there's going to be an end to cities, but I do think that there will be a material change in the way that we think about land use. And I think that it is a big change in the way that we've all radically adopted the use of digital technologies. I guess, the beginnings of kind of the automobile moved us to a world where the suburbs were created. You could very easily see completely different ways of us, living. But I don't think that cities would be. Cities are still going to be hugely important as places where culture occurs. So there's so many benefits to cities that I think there's still going to be a major attraction, especially for people at a particular point in their lives.
Thanks. I agree with you, but it's interesting. Some people are posing that question. I do think that cities will obviously continue, and as things develop with COVID-19.
It's a bit like our high streets and our town centres. They were once they've undergone a massive shift over the past decade as well. But I think that we are, there's constant change going on, and the digital's had a huge impact on the retail sector and on what's been happening with our town centres. And I think it's only right to think that there'll be, similar large-scale impacts on cities. Quite what they are yet, I don't think we know, which is why it's so important to have, a model that can at least accommodate multiple different scenarios, because I think behaviours we don't know what those behaviours are going to be in 20 to 30 years. We've just got to be stress testing everything we do in light of what possibly might happen.
Well, thank you. That was an interview with Laurence Oakes-Ash, the CEO and co-founder of City Science. Thank you, Laurence.
Thank you.